Alrighty. I'm just going to take this off screen real quick. I went a little bit beyond what I meant to. All right. Check out this. This is when was this? Last week? Yeah. Oh, here it is, January the 30th.
Sorry,
Really,
I was talking to my daughter.
this is like a really, really awesome presentation that we watched on the 30th from the Missouri Hospital Association.
Yep, really good.
Very, very good. I don't know if they say how many people's in it, but there was a lot of people, and I think like everybody will see once you see how good it is, you'll be glad that there's, people that are putting on these presentations to teach like people that will eventually be, talking to lawmakers.
Yeah, or these are the people that work in those professions,
Yeah.
like the doctors and all that stuff. So pretty good. Okay, I'm gonna hit play. Enjoy.
Everyone to Public Health and Regulatory Considerations for Kratom and 7-OH products. I'm Daphne Partridge, the Vice President of Education at the Missouri Hospital Association, and we're super pleased to have everyone on the event today. We do have some upcoming events that we'd like to make you aware of before we get started. We will be doing our 9-part virtual series on Hospital Preparedness Academy starting on February 10th. Scan the QR code on the screen for information about that event or any of our in-person events. And as you can see on the screen, we have several leadership events coming up, as well as the Maternal SUD and NAS Summit. I do want to have a few housekeeping notes today. Because we do have a high volume of live attendees, you will note that your audio has been muted and video is disabled. Chat is also disabled for this event. However, we are going to accept questions and comments, and those questions will be taken at the end of the event as time allowed. To submit a question, you will need to go to Q&A, which should be a button at the bottom of your screen listed as Q&A. And if you don't see it, you should see a button that says More. And when you click on that, you should be able to access the Q&A function. When you submit a question, it will become visible to the hosts, and we will take those questions and hold them until the end of the event. If you need closed captioning to access this content, feel free to note those instructions on screen. It is helpful if you edit your Zoom name to your first name, last name, and organization, and you do have the ability to do that. And I want to note that this session is being recorded, will be sent to all registered attendees after the event, and you will have access to the content for 30 days. And it's my pleasure today to welcome Sean Billings. Sean is the Vice President of Substance Use Programming at Missouri Hospital Association and has over 15 years of experience managing local, state, and federally funded programs to enhance and expand behavioral health treatment services for high-risk and high-need populations in rural and urban settings. Welcome, Sean.
Well, thank you, Daphne, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to get right to it. So I'm going to give a brief session overview. So this session is designed to clarify the distinctions between natural kratom leaf, which contains trace amounts of 7-hydroxymitragene, also known as 7-OH, and I'm going to use 7-OH moving forward just because it's a lot easier, and the newer potent products with added or synthetic 7-OH that are increasingly available in retail settings and online. The webinar will address the growing concerns among healthcare professionals, public health officials, and community advocates regarding misuse, unpredictable potency, and emerging health risks associated with these unregulated substances and current legislative efforts. So we have two panelists. We have the director, Dan Neal, from High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, HIDTA, who is going to say a few words. He is going to speak both from a national lens and also from a Missouri state perspective. He's going to gently get into some of the actions, recent actions by the Food and Drug Administration, and some of their endorsements and recommendations to the Drug Enforcement Agency around Kratom and 7-OH. Then we're going to hear from Dr. Doug Burgess briefly. He's going to talk about the pharmacology, the health effects of the regulatory landscape. And then we also have the privilege of having one of our legislative champions, Representative Carolyn Caton. She is going to join us and help us field questions at the end if there's any questions for her. So
I
I'm going
didn't
to give
notice
brief
that.
introductions to all three, and then I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Dan. So beginning with Dan. Again, Dan Neal is a nationally respected law enforcement executive with more than 3 decades of service dedicated to combating transnational organized crime, disrupting drug trafficking networks, and strengthening public safety partnerships across the United States and abroad. Director Neal currently serves as director of the Midwest High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, a congressionally funded program under the Office of National Drug Control Policy. The Midwest HIDTA region encompasses Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, and parts of Illinois. Under his leadership, the Midwest HIDTA supports 60 initiatives. Director Neal retired from the Drug Enforcement Administration in December of 2021 after 27 years of distinguished federal service, most recently serving as Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Las Vegas District Office. In this executive leadership role, he directed complex counter-narcotics operations, developed regional drug control strategies, and built high-impact partnerships with federal, state, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies throughout Nevada. His career reflects extensive operational and strategic experience against transnational criminal organizations. Director Neal, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Dr. Doug Burgess is also here to say a few words. He serves as the Medical Director of Addiction Services at University Health and as an Associate Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. He completed his residency training at Duke University and a fellowship in addiction psychiatry at the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston. He is board certified in psychiatry and addiction psychiatry. He leads regional trainings related to mental health and substance use disorders and facilitates Missouri Telehealth Network's Opioid Use Disorder ECHO Group. He is an advisory board member for Mid-America Joint Technology Transfer Centers. Thank you, Dr. Burgess, for joining us. And lastly, thanks again to Representative Carolyn Caton for joining us, a Republican proudly representing part of Jackson County, District 33, in the Missouri House of Representatives. She was elected to her first 2-year term in November of 2024. Representative Caton has over 25 years of experience in the transportation industry. Beyond her professional achievements, she has been a dedicated advocate for her community, serving as a park commissioner for Blue Springs, and is actively involved in civic and faith-based initiatives, serving as an elder and board member for First Christian Church in Blue Springs, a board member for the MLK community event, and an avid volunteer for numerous organizations. Representative Caton's extensive background in transportation and logistics equips her with critical insight into the state's challenges and opportunities for growth. Coupled with her leadership in public service, she is committed to fostering responsible governance, advocating for efficient transportation policies, and strengthening the well-being of her constituents. I know that was a mouthful. I did that in about 7 minutes, so thanks for the grace. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Dan. Take it away.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'll try to be brief. I always want to take the opportunity to kind of explain what HIDTA is. A lot of people don't realize what it is, but it's high intensity drug trafficking area. It is a program funded by Congress under the President of the United States. And basically you have, let me see if I can get my PowerPoint here to work. And it's not going to the next slide. But as I continue, high intensity drug trafficking area, I cover all those states that were mentioned before, and I provide money specifically when we're talking about Missouri. I provide money to Missouri Highway Patrol. I provide money to Kansas City Police Department, several other federal agencies, and I consist of a board that I have that basically tells me what the issues are, and then we try to fund them and try to combat those issues. Also under my purview is I have another program called the Overdose Response Strategy, and I have what's called a Drug Intelligence Officer, and I have a public health analyst, and they work together to try to lower the number of drug overdoses in the state of Missouri and all the other states that I cover. And they try to work together because, you know, we recognize, I think as a nation at least, that law enforcement and public health sometimes don't speak the same language. So this program of ORS, it combines those two together to work together to speak the same language, to try to get out there and try to create legislation or try to get access to Narcan, et cetera. So that way we can lower the number of drug overdoses in our area. So let me see if I can try to advance to the next slide here. That's kind of a...
You should have control, Dan. Is it?
Yeah.
To delay? Did you?
Yeah, it's not.
Go on backwards.
It's not. There we go. There we go. Okay, so our purpose of high intensity is, like I just said, there's 33 of us throughout the United States. I cover one of the biggest areas for HIDA, and that's a map of all the HIDA counties in the United States, with Midwest HIDA being one of the biggest ones. We're the one of the largest ones in the United States, and I have a budget of about $16 million, and I divide that up amongst the states to, like I said, combat drugs, violence, and lower the number of drug overdoses within my area. It just kind of gives you an area. You know, Missouri and the Midwest is a hot spot, right? Because it's right in the heart of America. All kinds of drugs come from the West Coast to down south, and it's a transit point for a lot of the drugs coming into the United States. But what was interesting is that what another function that we have with Midwest HIDA is we have a function of trying to get ahead, of trying to warn the public or law enforcement or our policymakers about the dangers of certain drugs. A few years ago, we made people aware of more potent opioids, or more potent than fentanyl, and we were getting the word out, talking about that, and we produced papers and try to get the message out. And it came across our desk of more and more people utilizing 7-OH, especially in the Kansas City area. Come to find out, one of the biggest distributors of 7-OH is right here in Kansas City. And distributing, they have over 212 stores throughout the United States, and there's about 16 of them within about an 18-mile radius of just Kansas City alone. So we started looking at this going, okay, well, what's going on here? What exactly is 7-OH? And, you know, when you start looking at it, you think, well, it's Kratom. Well, not exactly. It really isn't. 7-OH, and I'm sure Dr. Burgess is going to speak more about this than I will, and probably in better detail. But 7-OH is a synthetic form of Kratom, right? And 7-OH is, you got to kind of distinguish the difference between natural Kratom and synthetic 7-OH. Natural Kratom contains only trace amounts of 7-OH, while synthetic products can contain up to 500% more 7-OH. And that's why you hear it being called gas station heroin a lot of times. And then the concern being, hey, wait a second, this stuff is not being regulated. There's no age regulations on it. There's no age restrictions on it or anything like that. And why is that? Why is it that you're able to walk in to, I'm sure there's price choppers throughout the Missouri area. You can walk into Price Chopper, where some of these American Shaman have some of their stores inside a supermarket, or maybe in the shopping plaza along with it, and you're able to go in and buy it as you're buying a gallon of milk. There's something wrong with that. And especially when there's no regulation, they're making claims that it's for chronic illness. They're making false claims that it can replace opioids, etc. So we started writing a paper, and it's on our website, midwesthida.org, and you can go to that website and go under resources, and you can find a bunch of other papers that we've written to try to get the word out. And they're pretty easy to look at and read. And so we started putting the known effects of health risk of 7-OH. It makes claims of pain relief, it has a euphoria, it's respiratory depression. There's really not been any kind of studies been done on it, or clinical studies to determine the effects and long-term effects. And then some of the other problems with it is you can tell in this photo, is that look at the coloring packaging. How appealing to that is that to kids? How appealing is that to you if you're in a store and you see the different coloring products? And I've got some other photos too of showing how appealing it is, and if it's being sold as a relief from opioids. It has a higher potency, higher propensity to of addiction. And the other problem of it is too is that what we saw is just in Johnson County, Kansas, we noticed that, okay, well, listen, how many drug overdoses have there been with 7-OH in Johnson County? Well, prior to our asking that, the answer was 0. And I know we're not opening a dialogue on this call here, but I would ask you, why do you think that there was 0 drug overdoses associated with 7-OH? Well, I can answer that. It was because they weren't testing for 7-OH. They were testing for fentanyl. They were testing for other types of drugs, but they weren't testing for 7-OH as being the cause of death. So now we've actually visited laboratories that are testing for companies for drug testing, et cetera, and we brought it to their attention. And we said, hey, listen, how many times are people drug testing positive for 7-OH? Well, prior to this, they'd never really heard of it. And the top 2 drugs at the time were methamphetamine and marijuana being testing positive for this drug testing company here in Kansas. So then we asked, well, can you start testing for 7-OH? And guess what? Within about a month, the number 1 drug that was coming positive was 7-OH, then methamphetamine, then marijuana. So it's kind of like we don't know what we don't know. And so by bringing this to attention, we're finding out that it's a lot more prevalent in the mainstream than we ever thought it was. And you may be asking, well, why aren't they testing for this? Well, I can just tell you is that because it's not a Scheduled 1 drug federally, they weren't testing for 7-OH. It's not scheduled at all. So where is it available at? Like I said earlier, gas stations, vape shops. It's available online. You can get on to different websites, Reddit and different ones, and find out where to buy this stuff. There's no regulation. There's nothing that is being done about it, although it has been recently. I will say this, is that Missouri and Kansas, both attorney generals for both states, are active in this pursuit of trying to get it regulated, which I'm very thankful for. The other thing is that Senator Roger Marshall has requested the Drug Enforcement Administration to emergency reschedule 7-OH. And that was a couple of months ago. I checked today, and it is now at DOJ and at DEA, and they're anticipating it being emergency scheduled within the next couple of months. But, I would like to see it, emergency scheduled within the states, because there's other states out there, such as Florida, California, Mississippi, Kentucky, and Ohio, that have already banned 7-OH within their state. It should be banned on many different reasons. The mislabeling, I think it's being targeted towards our youth, and then just the mere potency of this is crazy. The The FDA did launch an investigation back this summer after our report came out back in July, announced that it was recommending the scheduling of that. So you've got the FDA that's on board. You've got other senators and other politicians within Kansas and Missouri wanting this regulated or scheduled. And now you've got the DEA and DOJ trying to get it emergency scheduled as soon as they possibly can, because they understand the importance and the significance of how dangerous this drug can actually be. It's the 7-OH, the tablets, the capsules, the fruit-flavored gummies. Again, who are they targeting when you're making it into a fruit-flavored gummy? I go back to it's kids. It's kids. And when you talk, I've listened to an interview of the owner of American Shaman, and he makes more money off of 7-OH than any of his CBD or THC products combined. This is $1 billion organization or moneymaker for this organization. So they have no intentions, unless it's going to be rescheduled or banned in your specific city or state or nationwide, of ever changing when they're making this much money off of it. Again, I go back to where I said about poison control and the number of drug overdoses just in Kansas. We didn't really have a good number, right? And the reason being is that you look at the poison center data on 7H just recently, that they started testing for this. 24 cases from intentional abuse, 8 cases. I imagine once it becomes a Schedule I drug, those numbers are going to keep going up in every state. That's just in a small snippet of the United States. Emergency encounters is also going up on this. And again, it's a small snippet because it's not regulated. 7-OH and Kratom are currently legal in Missouri, as you know. I know there was one HB 1037 known as the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. I'm not sure what happened with that. I believe it died in the Senate, and I'm hoping that it resurfaces so we can get 7-OH regulated better than what it is. Conclusion and the key takeaways: it's a dangerous product. It's targeting our youth, and the FDA has recommended it to be scheduled. And the physical dependence and withdrawal systems is the same as opioids or fentanyl and some of these other drugs that are out there. I tried to go as quick as I could. That is my contact information if you have any kind of questions or anything like that. But I see my job as trying to bring awareness to our politicians and to the public about this, because a lot of folks don't realize the dangers of this drug or realize that it's even out there. They just think, well, it's Kratom, that's it. And no, there's 7-OH being sold inside these stores.
Dan, thank you. As we transition to our next speaker, Dr. Doug Burgess, I did want to take a moment to let all of the folks who joined the webinar after we started that we are going to be taking questions at the end of the content today, and those questions may be submitted through the Q&A function. You can find the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If it's not visible, click on the More button and you'll find Q&A. Thank you.
All right, I'm just gonna check.
I'd like to introduce Dr. Burgess.
All right, thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. All right, so are my slides pulling up okay?
Look great.
Yes, they are.
All right, perfect. So today I'm going to be talking about Kratom and, as Dan alluded to, some of the newer products that are different but related to Kratom. I want to share a little bit about myself and how I got interested in this topic. As Sean mentioned in the beginning, I'm an addiction psychiatrist in the Kansas City area at University Health. I work in an outpatient substance use disorder clinic, and I've been here for about 15 years. Periodically, I would get patients coming in to see me because they've been taking Kratom and found that they weren't able to stop using it. Up until about a year ago, this would happen 5 or 6 times a year, and most people were able to gradually wean off with some assistance. However, about a year ago, that people started coming into my office, and I started getting calls from providers in the community on a weekly basis. People were coming in saying they were using Kratom, but were quickly escalating their dosages. And when they tried to reduce, they were experiencing really severe withdrawal symptoms, anxiety, insomnia, muscle spasms, vomiting. I mean, it was much more intense than the withdrawal symptoms I was used to hearing from people who are using Kratom. And people were reporting that they started, even if they'd only been using Kratom for a really short period of time. People were really suffering. I wasn't sure how to help them. So I took a deeper dive into this topic. And then shortly after that, Representative Caton, who's joining us today, she was taking a tour of University Health, and she said, I really want to work on this. And for those of you who don't know her, I've gotten to know her a little bit. And when she's puts her mind to something, she gets going. So she's like, I really want to do something about 708. So we've been kind of collaborating on some things since then. I do want to acknowledge up front that this can be a confusing area, and there are people with very strong opinions in favor of and against people having access to these products. My goal today is to provide as objective an overview as possible, but frankly, this is an area of public health where there are still many unanswered questions. The medical community and general public needs to have as much data as possible for any chance at true informed consent. I want to leave time at the end for questions and comments, so I'm going to jump right in. First off, I have no relevant financial relationships to disclose here. I know Dan covered some of this, but one of the things that's really challenging about this topic is that the term Kratom is used to describe many different things, which can lead to confusion for people who are using the products as well as clinicians when they're trying to help people. In its natural form, Kratom is actually a tree-like plant that can be 50 feet tall, 15 feet in diameter. There's evidence that it's been used by indigenous people for centuries. It's botanically related to coffee, and laborers would chew up the leaves for energy or pain relief when they were working kind of deep in the areas where these things grow. Local people would also take the leaves and brew them like you would with teas. It grows in the wild in places like Thailand, Malaysia, the Philippines, and New Guinea. And it's been used to treat just about everything you can think of, from fevers to cough, diabetes, cancer, depression, and anxiety. It's also said to enhance sexual performance. And I want to highlight that they have also used it to treat opioid addiction, which will be relevant later on when we talk about some of the reasons why people use it today. The native plant contains more than 40 alkaloids as well as secondary metabolites, all of which are biologically active. So they all have effects in the body. For today, we're going to focus on mitragynine, 7-hydroxymitragynine, and to a lesser extent, mitragynine pseudoinoxyl. So the last two are obviously mouthfuls. So I'm going to use the abbreviated names 7-OH and MP. Mitragynine is the most prevalent component of Kratom, with percentages ranging between 12 and 66%. This can vary based on factors like the geography where the plant grows, as well as the technique used to harvest and process the plant. And when it's ingested, some of the mitragynine is converted to 7-OH in the body, and this is subsequently converted to MP. I do want to highlight that in the naturally occurring plant, there is very little 7-OH present, less than 2% in naturally occurring sources, and much of that is actually produced when the plant is harvested and processed. So this slide is a simplified illustration of how Kratom moves through the body. When Kratom is consumed, it's absorbed through the digestive tract and almost immediately gets taken to the liver. In the liver, the mitragynine is broken down, which produces 7-OH. I don't know how many clinicians we have joining us today, but it's important to note that the cytochrome P3A4 and to a lesser extent 2D6 and 2C19 systems are involved in the metabolism of Kratom. That's an area that needs to be studied further, but this is an area, this could potentially impact the metabolism of some other medications that are also processed by those same systems in the liver. From the liver, 7-OH is distributed throughout the brain and nervous system, where it acts kind of like an opioid. So it's what's called a partial agonist. So it does act on opioid receptors, but has a slightly different effect. This is believed to be the mechanism by which Kratom provides pain relief and euphoria. 7-OH is further broken down to produce MP, which also acts like a potent opioid. When Kratom is ingested at typical amounts, which is about 5 grams of leaf material, An individual will typically feel effects at about 60 minutes, and these effects will last for 2 to 3 hours. Again, these results are based on leaf material and that are ingested in standard amounts. The effects can vary significantly if they're ingested in other ways, or they're enhanced like some of the commercial products that we'll talk about later. So kratom has a really complex effect on the human body. I mentioned earlier that there are over 40 alkaloids and active metabolites that are present. We don't completely understand what all of those compounds do after they're ingested. However, we do know some of the systems that it acts on. It inhibits the release of norepinephrine, which you might recognize as noradrenaline, which is the precursor for adrenaline. This system is associated with some of the more distressing symptoms people experience when they're undergoing opioid withdrawal. So this might partly explain why kratom is reported to maybe help people who are experiencing opioid withdrawal symptoms. Kratom's also been shown to have effects on the serotonergic and dopaminergic systems, two systems known to impact mood and the sensation of pleasure. It interacts with the NMDA system in the central nervous system. When this system is activated, it generally has excitatory effects in the body. When you block this system, that might explain some of the calming and sedating effects reported when people use kratom. Finally, as we've already discussed, mitragynine, 7-OH, and MP all have effects on the endogenous opioid system. It partially activates mu-opioid receptors, and it also blocks kappa and delta receptors. While all of these have opioid effects, 7-OH and MP are particularly potent. Like Dan mentioned, 7-OH is 46 times stronger than mitragynine and 13 times stronger than morphine. More research is needed, but there's some indication that MP may be even more potent than 7-OH. Anything that artificially stimulates opioid receptors is concerning for a couple of reasons. The first is that overstimulation of opioid receptors can cause people to stop breathing and die. The other concern that people who take substances that stimulate this system over a long time, they can become physically dependent on these substances. This means that when they stop taking them, they can have withdrawal symptoms. They have no choice but to continue using them. Otherwise, they're going to feel really sick. So these are the patients who are coming into my office and they're anxious, they can't sleep, they're having diarrhea. I'm really, really uncomfortable. As the slide shows, kratom has a wide range of effects. It's generally thought that it's the delicate balance between all of these systems that's really necessary to produce the effects of natural kratom. When individual components are enhanced or removed entirely, the resulting product can have very, very different effects, and oftentimes they're unpredictable. So here's a cheat sheet that I'm including today. I would encourage you, because we're going to be talking about some of these more technical terms, I encourage you, use your cell phone, take a picture of this so you can refer as we go through. There isn't a good way to get around some of the complexities involved in talking about kratom. Keep in mind that just because someone says they're using kratom, that doesn't mean that they're actually referring to the kratom plant or kratom products. Oftentimes they're talking about 7-OH or kratom products with enhanced 7-OH effects. If you work with people who are using these products, I encourage you to look them up. You can find where they ordered them on the internet or search on the internet, and try to find out what they're actually taking. If you can't find it on the internet, you can also have them take a picture of it, and have them take a picture if there does happen to be a label. Now, you have to take anything that's on the label with a grain of salt, because as Dan was mentioned, this is not regulated, so there's no guarantee that a lot of these products actually contain the things they say they do. But it's at least a place to start so you can figure out what people are taking. Now I'm going to shift slightly and talk about the patterns of use we've seen in the United States. Overall use has increased as these products have become more widely available and marketed. It's difficult to get accurate numbers, and we see quite a bit of variation between sources. Some estimates are that up to 15 million Americans consume kratom regularly, but this number comes from the American Kratom Association, a group that lobbies for the kratom industry. A 2025 article from Current Psychiatry reports they found ranges from 0.6 to up to 9% of adults in the United States had some use within their life. When you look at the reasons why people use Kratom, the most common reason they cite is chronic pain. Almost a third of them list that as the main reason. This is followed closely by anxiety and depression, with about a quarter of people using for those reasons. And finally, almost 20% of people report that they use Kratom in place of other substance use, most commonly opioids. This is a critical aspect that has to be considered when people start talking about regulation. Data here is very shaky, but there are undoubtedly people who are using Kratom to avoid using opioids. We have recent experiences with the rapid reduction in access to prescribed opioids, leading to unintentional consequences of people turning to illicit opioids and subsequent surges in overdoses. Rapid elimination of access to Kratom without a plan to offer treatment, and to people who were previously dependent or became dependent on opioids because of Kratom use, could result in unintended public health consequences. So just how many people are continuing, people are continuing to use the product because they experience withdrawal symptoms? A 2024 survey with 395 participants who were using Kratom on a regular basis found that 80% of them met criteria adapted from opioid use, typically in the mild to moderate range. There are some limitations when we apply criteria for opioid use disorder to people who use Kratom products, but this study also used a standardized scale to measure subjective opioid withdrawal symptoms. Opioid withdrawal includes things like muscle cramps, nausea, diarrhea, anxiety, hot and cold flashes. People surveyed had an average score of 13.5, which qualifies as mild to moderate opioid withdrawal. So it's, this idea that any of these products don't potentially produce physical dependence is just not accurate. Here I'm showing some of the side effects that have been reported with Kratom use. This data comes from the National Poison Control Data System, which collects information when people call to report complications as a result of exposure. When reviewing this information, it's important to remember that there are limitations. We don't get complete data around other drugs that are consumed at the same time, what dosages of Kratom were consumed, how it was consumed, or verification that it was actually Kratom and not something else that the person thought was Kratom. Additionally, we can't get information on how frequently these symptoms might occur because we don't know how many people are actually using Kratom. With those things in mind, these are the most commonly reported negative effects reported to the National Poison Control Center. Agitation, rapid heartbeat were the most common, followed by sedation, confusion, vomiting. Withdrawal symptoms were the primary concern in about 6% of people who were calling, underscoring again the potential for physical dependence. Less common but potentially more serious reasons for calling included seizures, hallucinations, respiratory depression, and coma. Additionally, there were 4 cases related to neonatal abstinence syndrome. For those of you not in the clinical field, this is the medical term for any significant withdrawal symptoms a newborn may experience, and can be caused by all sorts of substances or medications a woman might be taking during pregnancy, things like opioids, benzodiazepines, nicotine. We have very little data and information about how commonly this occurs with Kratom, but there's been enough anecdotal reports to raise concern. There was another study conducted that reviewed the evidence for severe or serious health effects related to Kratom use. This study was published in 2025 and reviewed 95 cases from the medical literature. The data this group was able to review was limited because of incomplete toxicology reports, as well as information about other drug use and comorbid medical problems. Ultimately, the authors concluded that there was, quote, insufficient evidence to support the claim that Kratom consumption alone increases the risk of severe health effects. Severe health effects would include things like sudden death, need for emergency resuscitation, and cardiac arrhythmias. Keep in mind that we have much less data about products that contain artificially elevated concentrations of 7-OH or MP. It's very possible that these products will have a much different risk profile. I found that many people will alternate back and forth between these products without even realizing that they can have significantly different effects. Today, we're seeing a rapidly changing landscape related to the products that are being sold online or in gas stations. 7-OH and MP can be created or concentrated in lab setting, which results in much more potent products. In 2025, a research group conducted a survey of internet websites and found over 300 7-OH and MP products. Among those products, over 80% contained only 7-OH and about 15% were combined products, and a little over 3% were MP only products. I got these images on my own from a website, so they may not have been included in the recent survey, but I wanted you to see some examples. The packaging of products online looks very professional, appealing. You could easily make the argument that the packaging would be particularly appealing to children and adolescents. The authors of the study found that most of the combination products were being sold labeled as Kratom, but the vast majority of 7-OH only products were being labeled as 7-OH. Over 70% of the products included effect claims, most commonly related to increasing focus or relaxation. About 40% reported that they helped with pain, and several products also had names alluding to prescription opioids. For example, you can see at the top there the Dozo liquid Perks. So Perks is a slang term for Percocets, also a street term for Perk 30s, which refers to fentanyl. So they're really trying to market these as an alternative to opioids. Let's see. One of the things that was particularly concerning is that over 1 in 10 claim to help treat substance use disorders. This is a particular concern because we really have a lack of data supporting these claims. We have good data supporting other treatments for substance use disorders, and I worry that people are going to be delaying access to accessing care or trying to treat things on their own that we know carry significant risk of morbidity and mortality. So that's a significant concern when people are making claims that haven't been proven. These products can also be really expensive, with costs averaging around $4 to $5 per recommended dose or serving. Many of the people coming to see me in my clinical practice report that they had to quickly escalate the amount that they were taking. Some people report taking 10 to 12 doses per day in order to avoid withdrawal symptoms. And so that's often the primary reason they're coming in to see me. They're spending so much money on these products, and when they try to cut back, they can't do it. They feel awful. Next, we want to review the regulatory landscape around Kratom and products derived from Kratom. As with everything else we've been covering today, it's complicated. One of the main reasons it's so complicated is because there's so much confusion around the language and terms used when you're talking about Kratom. It gets used interchangeably to refer to products that are closer to naturally occurring compounds, as well as products that have enhanced 7-OH or MP. Because there's little regulation in this industry, it's almost impossible to determine with any certainty whether or not labels on the product are accurate. There's generally not standardized testing to ensure that products aren't contaminated with other substances, including pesticides, heavy metals, or other substances altogether. It's also a big industry that comes with lots of financial motivation to limit overregulation. As Dan mentioned earlier, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. We can't talk about Kratom regulation without discussing the American Kratom Association. This organization is a nonprofit organization that was formed in 2014 that does a lot of work advocating around potential regulation and oversight of this industry. This is the mission statement and main goals of the American Kratom Association. Personally, I think their goals of education and providing accurate information so people can make informed decisions is noble. I just question their ability to provide this in an unbiased manner. I spent quite a bit of time looking through their website, and they have a lot of information under the science tab, but I couldn't find anything pertaining to risks that have been raised in the medical literature. Additionally, the scientific data they present often comes from medical journals that are not as well respected. Less respected journals may not be peer reviewed, or people can pay in order to get their articles published. Finally, there's some data that they include that is just outright incorrect. For example, under the science section, the website states that chocolate, exercise, and human breast milk act on opioid receptors in a similar fashion to Kratom. This is just not accurate. I think they're trying to stretch and say that things that activate the reward system can result in the release of endorphins, which are basically opioids that your body produces naturally. But this is not in any way the same thing as a substance that directly stimulates opioid receptors when you consume it. Ultimately, when it comes to Kratom, I think it is like most debates in life where the truth lies somewhere in the middle, and there's likely compromise to be found. Regulation to ensure standards in labeling, quality control, and limited concentrated 7-OH and MP products is one area where I think there may be common ground. Currently, the FDA lists Kratom as, quote, a new dietary ingredient that hasn't been approved, so it's not regulated as a dietary supplement under the FDA. Kratom is classified as a drug of concern by the DEA, and in 2016 it moved to classify Kratom as a Schedule 1 compound. Schedule 1 compounds are defined as substances with no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for misuse. So examples are things like heroin, LSD, and ecstasy. Many people are probably aware that cannabis is also classified as a Schedule 1 compound. Compounds are generally made Schedule 1 as an attempt to protect the public, but there's been significant criticism of this practice. I'm not going to cover all of the arguments against this today, but did want to highlight two of the more relevant concerns in this case. For one thing, possession of a Schedule 1 compound is associated with very serious criminal penalties that many people argue are overly harsh and disproportionately impact marginalized communities. The other big problem with Schedule 1 substances is that it becomes very difficult to conduct medical and scientific research because all of the regulations and safety measures that need to be in place. You need armed guards, everything needs to be locked. It's really difficult to conduct research. As a result, it can create a catch-22 where a compound is added to the list because there isn't evidence of medical benefit, but we can't conduct the trials needed to demonstrate whether or not there is actual medical benefit that could be there. Ultimately, Kratom was not classified as a Schedule 1 drug due in large part to public outcry from people who use Kratom products. In 2021, the World Health Organization reviewed available data and determined there was, quote, insufficient evidence of adverse effects that would warrant additional critical review or inclusion in the United Nations list of internationally controlled substances. However, it does remain on the list of substances under surveillance, and there is particular concern for 7-OH products. Most recently, the FDA recommended that 7-OH products with high 7-OH concentrations be classified as Schedule 1 controlled substances. This recommendation was made last summer, but I haven't heard anything further. It sounds like Dan had an update on that they are continuing to move forward with this. The FDA did issue warning letters to 7 companies for marketing products containing 7-OH. Those companies are listed here. And include Shaman Botanicals and Relax Relief Rejuvenate trading companies, which are headquartered in Kansas City, Missouri. The other companies' headquarters are listed in Texas and California. Texas, California, and Florida for reference. There have been efforts to regulate Kratom and Kratom-related products at the state level. About 20 states have some regulations in place, and they are frequently passed as Kratom Consumer Protection Acts. They have a lot of similarities, but they're not identical. I haven't read all of these, but one that stood out as particularly thorough, in my opinion, especially as it pertains to labeling requirements, was Colorado. If there are any policymakers joining today, I would encourage you to review their legislation. I included a link at the end of today's presentation. It addresses labeling related use by minors, packaging that would be appealing to as well as use during pregnancy or while breastfeeding. 5 states and Washington, D.C. have classified Kratom and its components as Schedule 1, which makes them illegal to manufacture, distribute, or possess in those states. Arkansas specifically lists 7-OH as a Schedule 1 substance. This map was created in April of 2025, and since that time, Florida's Attorney General issued an emergency rule making 7-OH a Schedule 1 drug, and they were followed by Kentucky in November. Dan shared some additional information that I wasn't aware of about California and I believe another state, I can't recall which one, but they've also banned 7-OH. As you'll notice on this map, Missouri is one of the states without any current regulation related to Kratom or 7-OH. Going back to 2022, Missouri legislators successfully passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, but this was vetoed by then Governor Parson because Kratom was listed as, quote, a food or dietary ingredient in the bill. If you'll recall, the FDA classifies Kratom as, quote, a new dietary ingredient that has not been approved, so the Missouri law would have conflicted with that. So ultimately, he vetoed that. In 2024, the Kratom Consumer Protection Act was advanced through the House, but ultimately stalled out in the Senate. They just ran out of time. There were two other bills that never made it out of the Emerging Issues Committee. Numerous cities and counties around the states have passed ordinances recently. In 2009, St. Charles County passed an ordinance that requires retailers to register following label requirements, and also prohibited the sale of concentrated products. In Kansas City, where I live, Mayor Lucas introduced an ordinance aimed at banning the sale of a number of unregulated substances containing psychoactive ingredients, including 7-OH, Kratom. That ordinance also would have applied to synthetic cannabinoids and Delta 8 or 9 THC. Blue Springs, Missouri also responded to reports of student overdoses by considering ordinances that would ban 7-OH and Kratom or restrict its sale to individuals over the age of 21. My understanding is that the mayor may be joining us, so maybe they could add something to the comments, and we could share that in the end where that ordinance stands. Currently, there are several bills that have been proposed focusing on the regulation of Kratom and Kratom-related products at the state level. So these are the current bills proposed for this session. I've included their numbers as well as the last names of legislators proposing them. In addition to these bills focused on Kratom products, Representative Carolyn Caton, who is joining us today, and I mentioned earlier, has we've been working together to try and get some of the language around this down. She's also in the process of drafting legislation that would specifically ban synthetic 7-OH and MP to avoid any potential loopholes in efforts at regulation of Kratom. So in conclusion, Kratom has a complex and incompletely understood impact on the body when it's ingested. Based on the information we currently have available, Kratom in its pure form does not appear to represent a high risk for overdose or acute injury. There's still a lot we don't know about its long-term effects, including the frequency of physical dependence and addiction. And there's been a recent trend towards 7-OH and MP in concentrated or isolated forms, which are much more potent and appear to carry a more significant risk of causing physical withdrawal and potentially acute injury, including overdose. The medical community and general public is in need of significantly more research and ongoing education as potential risks and benefits related to use emerge. As a physician and parent, my message to the community would be that we certainly don't have enough safety data related to use in adolescents, where brains are still developing. I would also recommend avoiding use in individuals who are pregnant or trying to become pregnant. For people using these products to try and treat opioid or other addictions, we have many treatments and interventions with significant data supporting their effectiveness. Seek out professional help. And for adults who choose to use these products, understand that the reports of benefits related to Kratom and other products have not been proven, and there are potential consequences that we are still trying to understand. Here are some additional resources that the Missouri Hospital Association will be distributing to participants later today. Here are my references, and now we'll open it up for questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Burgess. And I'm going to take just a minute to get all of our speakers on camera here so that we can take some of the questions that have come in to chat. And I'd also like to note that we are still accepting questions. So you may submit your question using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we are going to line those questions up and take them as time allows. One moment. Okay, our first question. This, I believe, is directed toward Dr. Burgess. How long do withdrawal symptoms typically last, and does Narcan work against 7-OH?
That's a great question. So Narcan should work against 7-OH. So Narcan is a strong blocker at opioid receptors. And so anything that stimulates opioid receptors, Narcan should work on that. But I don't know if there's specific data. I have heard anecdotal evidence of people who have suspected overdose of 7-OH who have been resuscitated with naloxone or Narcan. The second question, how long do withdrawal symptoms last? It is variable. So some people it's very short, but I have one woman, it was a really sad story. She was in recovery from a stimulant use disorder, had been in recovery for several years. She went into menopause, and someone at one of her recovery meetings recommended that she take Kratom. And I don't know if she was taking Kratom, 7-OH, like we talked about, it's confusing. But she took this product and she took it for about 6 months. Didn't find it particularly beneficial, and then she stopped. By the time she came to see me, we were 6 months later, and she was still experiencing withdrawal symptoms then. So some people, it's 7 days, a week, 2 weeks maybe. Other people, I've seen it last for months and months. And it's not always like those severe acute withdrawal symptoms. Some people develop kind of these chronic low-level anxiety. I can't sleep at night. I just increase aches and pains, things like that.
What harm reduction strategies are recommended?
Well, this is an area that I just don't think we have a lot of, in relation to Kratom and 7-OH, I just don't think we have a lot of information. And again, this is kind of the lowest level of evidence, which is just my experience in working with people. If they're using 7-OH products or MP or things like that, I tell them to stop and transition back over to Kratom. At least you're getting less of that potent opioid sort of activity. So that would be one thing. I would recommend anybody who is using these substances that they have access to naloxone. I think that's just a generally good practice. I recommend, my wife and I, we've got 2 young kids. We have naloxone in my car and her car, and we keep it at home because I think, it's like a fire extinguisher. So naloxone is one thing that can be helpful. Any comorbid substance. So if people are using Kratom or Kratom products and combining it with alcohol, other substances, we know that, that's the big thing with the risk data in the criticisms of when, that oftentimes advocates of Kratom will have overdoses and different things. They'll say, well, what else were they using? Well, admittedly, we don't always know. It's a messy situation. So I think anytime you're combining multiple substances, that's a risk.
Thank you. How can we bring more attention to the possible dangers of 7-OH and Kratom products?
Well, MHA could sponsor a webinar. Maybe that would be effective. I think there's been a ton of attention on this. And so, I get, especially the Department of Health and Senior Services sent out a bulletin, and my phone blew up that day, text messages. I've seen a lot on the news. I think it's starting to come out more. But frankly, that's not my area of expertise. I don't know. Maybe that's something that Representative Caton has an idea, or maybe Dan.
Yeah, I think by having conversations like this, like you said, especially in the Kansas City area, there has been probably every news station has covered this issue. I think more and more conversations, like in maybe Springfield. I don't know if they've had the conversations down there. I've been asked to come down there and talk about this, but just really have the conversations, get the word out, and let's talk about this, because my feeling, this personal opinion, is that once it is a Scheduled I drug, you're going to see a lot more statistics behind it to show that, yeah, this is definitely been the cause of overdoses or whatever.
I will say
So
that I plan on working with several other representatives in the Kansas City area to see if we can hold a live seminar, what we're doing today, with some of the similar information at different locations around the area to get that word out. So that's one thing I'll be working on as well.
I have a question, one other thought, and then a question maybe for Dan. So one other thing, I think that's why it's so critical that we get the labeling requirements right on this stuff, because if it's on there like it is with cigarettes, like may cause cancer, has been associated. All of those things need to be on there. I think that at least that's one way that when the person's buying the product, they can see it. My other question was, again, the Schedule 1 thing, I get a little bit nervous about because the penalties are so harsh. For Dan, isn't there, if we ban it, can't we test? Like, there's no reason why we can't test. There are things we test for that aren't Schedule 1 substances. So like alcohol, for example, they test for that. It's not Schedule 1. I just get nervous because once it's Schedule 1, we will never actually find out how significant these risks are because it's going to make research very, very challenging.
Yeah, so on the emergency scheduling by DEA, I believe they can make it so maybe it's not a Schedule 1, maybe it's a Schedule 2 or 3, so that testing can happen. And you're right, more testing needs to be happening on it. And you're correct about Scheduling 1; it would ban it from being able to be tested. So I do believe that they would just at least emergency schedule it, get it on the schedule, either a 2 or 3, that then we could have further discussion and further research into it.
And for Representative Caton's legislation, one of the things that we're trying to make sure we include is exemption for state research organizations, so that those things can happen if it gets banned.
So I do want to be mindful of time. It is noon, and if the speakers are willing to continue to address questions, we can stay live. I do want to note to all attendees who may have to step off that we will continue to record the event, and that recording, as well as the resources that our speakers have allowed us to share, will be sent to all registered attendees probably the first part of next week once we have the recording and the editing.
I'll stay on as long as there aren't any hard questions. Then I have to go.
Okay, thank you.
I'm good for a few more minutes as well.
Thank you so much. We very much appreciate your time. As a prescribing practitioner, prescribing buprenorphine and using it specifically for a few patients struggling with 7OH with some success, could you help with resources, including cheap and free access to test specifically for 7OH, and anecdotal or other studies showing standard BUP initiation versus low dose versus microdosing?
Yeah, so that I'm glad, that's a very technical question. I'm glad you asked. So one of the resources that I shared is for the PCSS. That is a great resource that's sponsored by SAMHSA. One of the things that they have is a discussion forum. I could have included another 30 slides on treatment. That was really outside the scope of the topic today, but you're 100% correct. Particularly for people who have comorbid opioid use disorder, the recommendation for treating people with Kratom use and 7OH and MP is that you go immediately to those medications that we use to treat opioid use disorder. Frankly, there's just not a lot of data out there on dosing strategies. I tend to do what you described there with that microdosing induction, particularly if it's Kratom, because the risk of acute overdose from pure Kratom is low. And so if we are initiating buprenorphine, doing that cross taper is less likely to they don't have to go through withdrawal symptoms. One of the people I did try that technique, though, we did get precipitated withdrawal with it pretty significantly, even, at a very, very low, we were using like less than 1 milligram of buprenorphine to stop, and he experienced precipitated withdrawal and ended up in the emergency department. So again, that is one of the big areas that in terms of treatment, we need more data on, not just the medications, but even, are these psychosocial interventions effective? And then like Kratom, it's such a complicated molecule. It impacts so many systems. When you're treating opioid, that is a clean drug. It acts just on opioid receptors. Kratom acts on all those different systems. And so do we need to be thinking about that differently? It's more than just the opioids. Do we need to be treating some of those other withdrawal symptoms from some of those other symptoms? We just don't know right now.
Thank you. While we have the legislator on and Dan, I have a question about what are the barriers to Missouri regulating these substances when other states have regulated?
So I'll take it from a legislative perspective. We've had several bills. that actually Dr. Burgess has mentioned that have gone through the House to the Senate, haven't made it past. Currently, the bills that are proposed right now, they're virtually all the exact same bill. And there is labeling restrictions and requirements around the Kratom. One is to create, again, the Kratom Protection Act. And that's fantastic. None of them actually ban 7-OH.
What in the world?
What the heck happened?
I don't know, just cut off. Oh wait, here it goes. I don't know what
Research
for.
companies, not just, some other organization. So it can
Sorry.
get done, and we have different mechanisms. So for instance, if my bill doesn't progress as quickly as maybe one of the Kratom bills is doing, I have already spoken with those representatives. What we'll do is put mine on as an amendment to then complete that bill. So we've got different avenues. So I feel pretty confident we'll be able to get something done this year. It's being talked about. People are aware, and they're understanding the necessity that this has to happen.
Thank you. And then what can the community do to help combat the unregulated sale of 7-OH?
Well, I assume Representative Kate would agree that contacting your representatives as sponsors of some of these bills would be a great thing.
That's
Yeah,
absolutely
absolutely.
correct. And then on a personal note, just start sharing. Use, social media, it can be a great thing or a bad thing. So let's use it for a great thing. Let's post on your social media, take some slides off of this and make people aware. And let's just start getting the word out to every single person that we can reach about the hazards and the dangers of 7-OH and its derivatives in particular. So talk about it, and let's make sure that every single person we come in contact with is aware of it. And that's one way we can combat this and make people aware. And also, as Dr. Burgess said, reach out to your state representative. If you don't know who that is, reach out. I'll help you figure it out. But we're here to help. We want to help.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that 100%. Reach out to your representative. That's what helped with me. We reached out to Senator Marshall's office, and he was immediately on board and wanting to know more about it. And some of our other U.S. senators here, and just reach out to anybody and everybody, get the word out. Knowledge is power. So.
You're on mute.
Thank you. This question is related to best practices for working with patients who use Kratom. In this individual's experience, some individuals presenting with Kratom use have exhibited severe agitation or psychotic-like symptoms, which can be challenging to manage. What does current evidence say about these presentations, and how should providers or peers approach them from a public health and engagement standpoint?
So current scientific data, as far as I know, and I've looked at this a fair amount in terms of like psychotic symptoms and things like that resulting from withdrawal, there isn't standard practice. There isn't a lot of data on this. I would be, that would be an atypical presentation for opioid withdrawal or Kratom withdrawal or 7-OH, so acute psychosis. So I would be screening very closely for an underlying mental illness. Again, to highlight one of the concerns that I have with these products is I think because Kratom and these different products, the word is out that this works for everything. If you look at the native plant, they literally used it for everything from energy to treating cancer. I mean, the full spectrum. And so that is the narrative around some of these substances, is that if there's something wrong, use these and it'll make you feel better. And so there might be a tendency for people to seek out, that going to a gas station is a lot easier than, unfortunately, I wish it was easier to get connected to mental health services, but going to a gas station is a lot easier than coming to see me or one of my colleagues here. And so, screening very closely for an underlying psychotic disorder, and someone may have had symptoms and then is self-medicating, and now those things are just sort of exacerbated by the fact that they're going through opioid withdrawal. But I would treat it as psychosis with atypical antipsychotics and things like that.
Thank you very much. And at this time, I'm going to acknowledge we had a lot of questions in chat that unfortunately we did not have the time to address. So we understand that there's a lot of questions. There's a need for more information to support that. We will be sending out the resources shared by all the speakers today, and as well as the recording, and that will go out to anyone who registered to attend this event. Again, you can look for that in your email boxes next week. Definitely want to thank all of our presenters. And Sean, do you have any final thoughts?
I would just echo that your sentiment, Daphne. Thanks to all of our wonderful presenters for taking the time to talk about this very important topic. Thanks to all of you. It looks like we still have 144. So I think we got up to almost 270. This is important. So if you participate in a prevention coalition, please feed this information out. That's sort of how I really got wind of this, and through some of the programs we support at MHA. So yeah, let's just continue these discussions, and hopefully MHA will have an opportunity to lift this important topic up in the future, and we can get this across the finish line. So yeah, have a blessed afternoon, and thanks for your time.
I want to thank all of you too. This is a ton of work to put this on. And so I know there's a lot of behind the scenes people who aren't on camera today, but Missouri Hospital Association, thank you. I think hopefully this
Daphne has a solid team. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that's good.
You forgot to do your thanks for watching.
Hold on. Hold on. All right, everybody. I hope you all have a great day.
Have a great weekend.
Enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. All right. Enjoy your weekend, everybody.